The knocker had not been polished in 2 years, and Rhys Calendar, Duke of Ashcombe, noticed it before he noticed anything else about the house he had once called home. Rust had crept into the brass lion's mouth. The door itself, when the footman finally opened it, groaned as though it, too, resented his return. "Your Grace." The footman's voice was flat, not cold, precisely, simply empty, the way a room is empty when someone has taken care to remove every trace of themselves from it. "Where is the Duchess?" Rhys asked. The footman's eyes flicked, just once, toward the staircase, and then away. "Her Grace does not reside here, sir." Rhys had crossed half of England in a hired carriage with mud to the axles and a purse considerably thinner than it had been 2 years ago, rehearsing the words he would say to Isolde, words of apology, dressed up as explanation, explanation, dressed up as apology. He had imagined her fury. He had imagined, in his more hopeful moments, something softer beneath the fury, some ember of the woman who had once waited at that same door, with her hand pressed flat against the glass, watching for his carriage. He had not imagined this. An empty house, a silent staff, a wife who was simply gone. "Gone where?" Rhys asked, and for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, his voice did not carry the easy authority of a duke. It cracked, just slightly, on the second word. The footman said nothing. Behind him, in the shadowed hall, Rhys could see dust sheets draped over furniture like shrouds. If you enjoy stories of Regency scandal, hidden truths, and the reckonings that follow them, consider subscribing to Noble Tales, because what the Duke is about to learn will unravel everything he believed about the wife he left behind. 2 years earlier, the house had been full of candlelight, and the particular hush of a marriage still finding its shape. Isolde Vane had married Rhys Calendar at 19, not for love exactly, though she had hoped love might come, the way frost sometimes gives way to green things, if a person is patient enough with the cold. Her father had been a baronet with more pride than income, and the match had solved problems for both families in the efficient, bloodless way such matches always did. For a while, it had almost worked. Rhys was not cruel. He laughed easily, danced well, and in the first year of their marriage, he had a habit of finding Isolde in whatever room she occupied and simply standing near her, as though her presence itself were restful. She had allowed herself to believe that this was the beginning of something real. Then came Camille Draycott. Camille was the widow of a minor viscount, beautiful in the particular way that made rooms rearrange themselves around her, and clever enough to know precisely how to be found by a man who wanted, more than anything, to feel interesting again. Rhys had met her at a card party in the spring of his second year of marriage. By autumn, he was spending more nights at his townhouse in London than at Ashcombe Hall, and by the following spring, the whispers had grown loud enough that even the servants stopped pretending not to hear them. Isolde bore it with the particular dignity expected of a duchess chin level, voice even, invitations answered as though nothing at all were wrong. But dignity is a costly thing to maintain, and it was during this time that she began keeping a small ledger, tucked beneath the false bottom of her writing desk, in which she recorded not her husband's infidelities but something stranger, discrepancies, rents that did not match the estate books, a tenant farm sold without her husband's signature appearing anywhere in the transaction. A letter, glimpsed only for a moment on the steward's desk, bearing her own handwriting except that Isolde had never written it. She said nothing of this to anyone. Not yet. The end, when it came publicly, which was its own particular cruelty. At the Hartley ball, in front of nearly 200 of the ton's most attentive eyes, Rhys arrived with Camille Draycott on his arm, and announced, with the careless confidence of a man who believes the world will simply absorb his choices without consequence, that he intended to remove to the continent with her. He did not use the word mistress. He did not need to. Isolde, standing near the refreshment table in a gown the color of storm clouds, heard it from a cluster of matrons before she heard it from her husband himself. And by the time Rhys finally crossed the room to speak to her, some 20 minutes later, unhurried, as though her humiliation could wait upon his convenience, the entire ballroom had gone quiet, in that particular way that meant everyone was listening, while pretending not to. "Isolde," he said, "we ought to speak privately." "We are speaking," she said. Her voice did not shake. Later, people would remark on this, on how remarkably composed the Duchess of Ashcombe had been, as though composure were the same thing as not caring. "You have already told the room what you came to tell me. I see no reason to repeat it in a smaller one." Something flickered across Rhys's face, not quite shame, not quite regret, but adjacent to both. "You must understand." "I understand perfectly," Isolde said. "Go to the continent, Your Grace. Go wherever you like. I find I no longer require your permission for anything, so I imagine you no longer require mine." She left the ball alone, in her own carriage, and did not weep until she was safely behind the closed door of her bedchamber, where no one, not her husband, not the servants, not the watching world, could see her do it. Within a fortnight, Rhys was gone, and Ashcombe Hall settled into the peculiar quiet of a household abandoned by its master. Isolde remained, technically still its mistress, though she felt, in those first weeks, less like a duchess and more like a ghost haunting rooms that no longer quite belonged to her. It was the steward, Mr. Osric Bell, who first suggested she might be more comfortable at the Dower House. Bell had managed the Ashcombe estate for 11 years, inherited by Rhys's father before him. A thin, precise man, with ink-stained fingers, and a manner so deferential, it bordered on invisible. Isolde had never had cause to distrust him, until the ledger in her desk began to fill with numbers that did not add correctly, and until she noticed, with growing unease, how often Bell's suggestions seemed designed to remove her from rooms where estate business was discussed. "The Dower House would suit your Grace's privacy far better," Bell said, standing in the study with his hands folded before him, "given the circumstances." "The circumstances?" Isolde repeated. "You mean my husband's abandonment?" "I mean only your Grace's comfort." She studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Bell, who authorized the sale of the Millbrook tenancy last autumn." A pause, brief but unmistakable. "His Grace, of course. His Grace was in London for the whole of that month. I have his letters to prove it. None of them mention Millbrook." Bell's expression did not change, but something in his stillness sharpened. "Perhaps your Grace is mistaken." "Perhaps," Isolde said, and let the matter drop, though she did not believe it, and she suspected, from the careful blankness of his face, that Bell did not believe she believed it either. That night, she moved her ledger from the desk to a place Bell would never think to look, sewn into the lining of an old traveling case that had belonged to her mother, one item among the modest collection of things Isolde still thought of as entirely her own. The weeks that followed were a slow accumulation of small, unsettling discoveries. A tenant farmer, cap in hand, mentioned to Isolde that he had been told rents were now to be paid directly to Mr. Bell rather than recorded in the estate office, on account of the Duke's absence, Your Grace, and no disrespect meant. A letter arrived from Rhys's solicitor in London inquiring, with polite confusion, about a loan against the estate's income that His Grace had apparently authorized, except Isolde knew, from the dates, that Rhys had been traveling on the continent at the time and could not plausibly have signed anything. And then there was the matter of the letter. It arrived for Isolde in a hand she did not recognize, though the seal bore no name. Inside was a single line: "Ask Mr. Bell what became of the Duke's true correspondence to his wife before he left for London." Isolde sat with the letter for a long time before she understood its implication. She had, in the final weeks before Rhys's departure, written him several letters pleading, in her own quiet way, for him to reconsider, for them to speak honestly, before he did something neither of them could undo. She had never received a reply. She had assumed, with the particular grief of a woman already bracing for abandonment, that Rhys simply hadn't cared enough to answer. But what if he never received the letters at all? It took Isolde 3 more months to gather what she needed: patient, careful work, conducted in the margins of a life that outwardly appeared to be nothing more than a discarded duchess, quietly withering in her husband's absence. She befriended Bell's underclerk, a nervous young man named Fenwick, who had recently been dismissed from Belle's employ under circumstances he would not fully explain, and who, after several conversations and the promise of a character reference, admitted a great deal. Letters intercepted, correspondence forged, a campaign, subtle and sustained, to widen the distance between Duke and Duchess, because a distracted, absent Duke and an isolated, disgraced Duchess were far easier for an ambitious steward to rob than two people who trusted and spoke plainly to one another. Belle had not created Reese's infatuation with Camille Draycott that particular weakness, Isolde reflected bitterly. Her husband had managed entirely on his own, but Belle had fed it, encouraged it, ensured that every letter Isolde wrote urging reconciliation vanished before it could reach London, and quietly siphoned estate funds into accounts of his own creation, while the Duke was too distracted and the Duchess too isolated to notice. By the time Isolde understood the full shape of it, she also understood something else. She could not fight this from inside Ashcombe Hall, watched, managed, gently steered toward irrelevance by a man who controlled every ledger and every servant's loyalty. She would need resources of her own, proof that could not be argued away, and, above all, she would need Belle to believe she had given up entirely, that the discarded Duchess had finally accepted her discarding. So, in the spring of the second year, Isolde Vane, Duchess of Ashcombe, disappeared. She did not run far as it happened, though it would take Reese considerable time and no small humiliation to discover that. She went instead to Bristol, to a modest house rented under her mother's maiden name, Mrs. Isolde Marchand, and there she did something that would have scandalized every drawing room in Mayfair. She went into trade. Her mother's family had once held a small interest in a shipping concern, mostly forgotten, mostly worthless, tangled in decades of disuse. Isolde, with the ledger's proof of Belle's embezzlement as leverage, and a mind considerably sharper than anyone at Ashcombe had ever troubled to notice, resurrected it. She was not without help, a solicitor named Mr. Pruitt, dry and thorough, who found the whole arrangement more interesting than scandalous, and Fenwick, the dismissed clerk, whose knowledge of Belle's methods proved invaluable in building a case precise enough to survive a court's scrutiny. Within a year, Mrs. Marchand's textile shipping venture, modest cargoes of cloth, moved efficiently between Bristol and the northern mills, had become quietly, unfashionably profitable. Isolde did not tell herself she was doing this for revenge, though revenge was, if she was honest in the private hours before sleep, some part of it. Mostly she told herself she was doing it because, for the first time in her marriage, she was the only author of her own choices, and she found she did not wish to stop being that. She also discovered, 3 months after arriving in Bristol, that she was to have a child. Reese, meanwhile, discovered that a life built on Camille Draycott's admiration was rather less sturdy than he had assumed. The continent had been glamorous for perhaps 8 months. Camille was witty, beautiful, and entirely uninterested in a man whose fortune, it gradually emerged, was not so limitless as she had believed. When Reese's letters from his own solicitor grew increasingly alarmed, strange withdrawals, unexplained debts, an estate income that seemed to be evaporating, despite Ashcombe's usually reliable rents, Camille's affections cooled with striking efficiency. By the second winter, she had transferred her attentions to a Russian count with considerably deeper pockets, and Reese found himself alone in a rented villa in Florence, with a stack of increasingly desperate letters from London, and a growing, uncomfortable suspicion that he had ruined something he had not fully understood the value of until it was gone. He returned to England not as a triumphant duke reclaiming his estate, but as a man quietly, privately terrified of what he might find. What he found, of course, was an empty house, a rusted knocker, and a footman who would not meet his eyes. It took Reese nearly 2 months to locate Isolde. Belle, when questioned, professed complete ignorance of the Duchess's whereabouts, expressed grave concern for her welfare, and suggested with the same smooth deference he had always employed that perhaps her Grace's disappearance was itself evidence of some private disgrace, best left uninvestigated. Reese, humiliated and increasingly desperate, very nearly believed him. It was Fenwick, the dismissed clerk, who finally found Rees, not the other way around. He arrived at Ashcombe Hall on a rain-soaked evening, asked for a private audience, and laid before the Duke a recount that undid, piece by piece, everything Rees believed about the collapse of his marriage. "She wrote to you," Fenwick said. "6 letters, Your Grace, in the month before you left for London." Mr. Bell intercepted every one. Rees sat very still. "That is a serious accusation." "I have proof, Your Grace. I kept copies. I did not understand, at the time, what I was helping to conceal. I understand now, and I find I cannot live with having helped conceal it." He produced the letters, not the originals, which Bell had destroyed, but transcriptions made in secret before their destruction, in Fenwick's own careful hand, sworn and witnessed. Rees read them in the candle-lit study where, 2 years before, Bell had first suggested his wife might prefer the dower house. He read Isolde's careful, restrained handwriting transcribed, but unmistakably hers, in cadence and feeling, pleading not for forgiveness, for she believed she had done nothing requiring it, but for honesty. For one conversation before he did something irreversible, for the chance to be told the truth by the man she had married, rather than left to learn it from a ballroom full of strangers. Rees did not weep easily. He wept that night. The trail from Fenwick's confession to Bristol took another month, complicated by Bell's increasingly frantic efforts to cover his tracks once he understood the Duke had returned and begun asking questions. Rees, to his credit, did not simply dismiss Bell and consider the matter closed. He hired his own solicitor, cross-referenced every discrepancy Isolde's ledger recovered, eventually, from its hiding place in the old traveling case, which Bell had never thought to search had recorded, and built, alongside Mr. Pruitt in Bristol, whom he located through the shipping registry, a case thorough enough to withstand Bell's inevitable denials. It was Pruitt who told him, with visible reluctance, about the child. Rees stood in the solicitor's cramped Bristol office for a long moment, absorbing this. "A daughter," Pruitt said, "nearly a year old now. Mrs. Marchand, that is. Her Grace has managed remarkably well without assistance, Your Grace, if I may say so. May I see her?" "That," Pruitt said, "is not a question for me to answer." Isolde had built in Bristol a life she had not expected to want as much as she did. Her daughter, whom she had named Wren for the small, plain, resilient bird, rather than for any grand family name, filled the modest house with a kind of noise and warmth Ashcombe Hall had never quite managed even at its best. The shipping venture continued to prosper. Mr. Pruitt had become, in his dry way, something like a friend. Isolde had not forgotten Ashcombe, had not forgotten Bell's crimes, or the case she still intended, eventually, to bring against him. But she had stopped waking each morning bracing for the grief of her old life, and she had begun, cautiously, to trust the shape of her new one. She was in the small garden behind the house, Wren balanced on her hip, when the carriage arrived. She recognized it before she recognized him, the Ashcombe crest, still bearing the same small dent in the left door panel it had carried since a coachman's error some 3 years before. Her whole body went still in the particular way a person goes still when a wound they believed had closed makes itself known again. Rees stepped down from the carriage looking older than his years, travel-worn, and, for the first time in Isolde's memory of him, uncertain. Isolde. Her name, spoken carefully, as though he were not entirely sure he had earned the right to say it. Your Grace. She did not move from the garden path. Wren, sensing tension without understanding it, pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. I know what Bell did, Rees said. I have proof. Fenwick came to me. I have spent 2 months undoing his lies, and He stopped, seemed to lose the thread of whatever speech he had rehearsed on the long road from Ashcombe. I have been a fool. I do not say that to excuse myself. I say it because it is true, and because I owe you the truth, even where it costs me. Isolde said nothing for a long moment. You left me, Rees, not Bell. You. Whatever he did afterward, whatever he intercepted, you chose to go to that ball with Camille Draycott on your arm. You chose to announce it to 200 strangers before you troubled to tell your own wife privately. Belle did not force that choice. No, Rhys agreed quietly. He did not. Then do not come here and ask me to fold 2 years into a single confession, as though understanding what happened undoes what it cost. I am not asking you to fold anything, Rhys said. I am asking for the chance to be known by you again slowly, if that is what it requires. And only if you wish it at all. I have no claim on that. I understand that. I came because I could not bear to let you go on believing I never received your letters, without at least telling you the truth of it myself. His gaze moved, then to the child in her arms, and something in his face shifted grief and wonder tangled together. And because I heard, there is a reason beyond Belle's crimes, that you might wish never to see me again, and I thought you deserved to decide that with the truth in front of you, not with me hiding in Florence pretending I did not already know. The formal reckoning came a month later, at a hearing convened at the request of the Ashcombe solicitors, though half the ton found some pretext to be present, drawn by rumors that had, by then, traveled the length of England. Osric Bell, confronted with Fenwick's testimony, Isolde's recovered ledger, and the full accounting Pruitt and Rhys had assembled between them, could not maintain his careful composure. He was stripped of his position, his ill-gotten funds seized toward restitution of the estate, and the magistrate made plain that criminal charges would follow. The room that had once watched Isolde's humiliation at the Hartley ball now watched, with considerably different sympathies, the unraveling of the man who had engineered so much of it. Isolde did not attend to witness Belle's disgrace for her own satisfaction, though she would not have pretended it brought her no relief. She attended because it was, finally, the truth spoken plainly, in a room full of people, the way she had once begged her husband to speak with her, before the world spoke for them both. Rhys did not ask Isolde to return to Ashcombe Hall that day, nor the next. He understood, finally, something it had taken him 2 ruinous years, and the near total loss of everything he valued to learn. That trust, once broken publicly and completely, could not be repaired by a single act of contrition, however sincere. He returned to Bristol not as a duke reclaiming what he believed was owed to him, but as a man visiting, with careful patience, the daughter he had not known existed until months into her life, and the wife whose forgiveness he had not yet earned, and might never fully earn. It was Wren, in the end, who built the first real bridge between them, her small, delighted laughter the first sound in months that made both her parents, sitting in careful, separate silence, look at each other and, however briefly, smile at the same thing. Isolde did not return to Ashcombe Hall for nearly a year, and when she finally did, it was on terms she had set herself. The shipping venture in Bristol would remain hers, under her own name, regardless of what happened between her and Rhys. Ashcombe's books would be open to her scrutiny, permanently, with no steward standing between her and the truth of her own household ever again. And Rhys, for his part, understood that he was being given not forgiveness, exactly, but the chance to become, slowly and by daily choice, rather than grand gesture, a man worth trusting. Standing once more at the door with the once rusted knocker polished now, gleaming faintly in the autumn light, Isolde looked at the house that had once felt like a cage, and found, to her own quiet surprise, that it felt instead like a place she might choose to return to, on her own terms, for as long as it continued to deserve her. Wren, 3 years old now and utterly unbothered by the weight of history in the doorway before her, tugged impatiently at her mother's hand. "Inside," she said. "Please, Mama." Isolde looked once more at Rhys, who waited without pressing, without assuming, on the threshold of the life he had so carelessly abandoned and so painstakingly tried to earn back. "Inside," Isolde agreed, and stepped through the door not as the discarded Duchess who had once left it in silence, but as a woman who had built, entirely on her own, the strength to decide what came next. If this story moved you, subscribe to Noble Tales for more stories of Regency scandal, hidden truths, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim a life someone else tried to take from you. And tell us in the comments, could you have forgiven him?